Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. We were supposed to have a guest on. He had to cancel last minute, so Marco and I kind of threw this together. I actually think it turned out to be a really good episode. Email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything else. That will get to both me and Marco. That's all. See you out there. All right, listeners. Marco always jokes that we don't do a lot of prep. I always bristle a little bit on my inside because I do a little bit of prep before we get on here whenever he says that.
Thank God that you do, because otherwise this would be a shit show. No, I mean, of course you do. You definitely. Jacob does prep. Now, whether we do research, that is a strong word.
We're doing research all the time. Like I started writing this new letter for Malden Economics, and somebody wrote me, "Is this one of your side hustles?" And I didn't know how to answer it because it's like I have one hustle. It's geopolitics. It gets sliced and diced like 5 different ways, so it's all the same hustle. But I guess to you guys, it seems like the same hustle. Anyway, I was prefacing it that way to say I have basically done not zero prep, but I have done less prep than I normally do because it's been a parent corner week from hell. Maybe we'll integrate parent corner into our chats like our Lord and Savior Bill Simmons down the road. But I do have a couple of things, and I thought, cousin, that the place that we should begin, obviously, the U.S. and Iran still at war. Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz still basically closed. But I thought the big news over the weekend, and we sort of touched on this the last time we talked, was that China ordered companies in its country. That's a ridiculous sentence. China ordered Chinese companies not to comply with U.S. sanctions on 5 domestic refiners linked to the Iranian oil trade. They did this deploying a blocking measure that was introduced in 2021 that was aimed at protecting Chinese firms from foreign laws that China deemed unjustified. Um, it's interesting because I mean that's gobbledygook for China. Basically, just told its companies, you shouldn't give a shit about U.S. sanctions. We don't care. You can ignore U.S. sanctions. Like we're good. We've got your back. And we get that coming into the upcoming Xi Jinping Trump summit, which is supposed to be May 14th, May 15th. For the listeners back at home, you might remember this was supposed to be around March 30th, and Trump delayed it because of his special military operation in Iran. You've had my favorite, Scott Bessent has really just been outdoing himself, making the rounds the last couple of days, just like making a fool of himself. But he also went on Fox earlier today, and I'll quote him: "China, let's see them step up with some diplomacy and get the Iranians to open the strait, like it's a college football game or something like that, Scott." And you know, just kind of a weird thing going into the summit, like pushing China to help on Iran, which is not what the summit is going to be about. And we'll see if the summit still pushes forward. So I think, Marco, that we need to focus about the U.S.-China relationship because the Strait of Hormuz is the Strait of Hormuz. And maybe the market will tank in 6 months once it realizes that Rory was right the whole time, even as he has no hair left on his body because he's been singed to a crisp. We'll figure that all out down the road. But I think the trajectory of the U.S.-China relationship is a really, really important. It's both part of this and it's separate from this. And I thought maybe we would start there and we can back into some of the other developments.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I would say that first of all, I mean, we've dispelled before in our conversations, and we may have to again, that all of this is about China. You know, it kind of makes no sense. China purchases somewhere between 15 and 30% of its crude from Venezuela and Iran. And it's not like the United States of America intends to forbid China from buying crude from these two countries. Let me give you an example. Let's say the United States of America managed to recalibrate the regime in both Venezuela and Iran. You now have pro-American, Desi Rodriguez's running these countries. And they refuse to sell this crude to China. China will be fine. This crude will therefore go to America or to some American ally. That American ally will not buy Saudi crude. There'll be more Saudi crude for China. China loses the discount that it had on this crude. So I don't see this being about China. It's not about China. Is this in some way going to arm President Trump with some leverage when he goes to Beijing? I think it arms him with a leverage insofar as that he looks like somebody who's comfortable with geopolitical volatility. He comes to Beijing armed with the last 3 months of America just doing kind of whatever it wants. But the US and China are effectively on the same side. They're both importers of crude. And this is the part of this where, a lot of folks look at the data and say, well, America exports energy. It exports petroleum products that are refined, but it still imports crude to do so. American exports have risen over the past several weeks, but that is because the US is effectively drawing on its strategic reserves. Those strategic reserves are seeping into the global markets through private inventories. So, no, I mean, like rig counts have not moved in the US. The US did not suddenly stumble upon some more, you know, melted dinosaurs. Like that's not that's not what's happening right now. So US and China are kind of in the same boat. They're both hoping that global supply of oil is increased, which is why in this particular case, I think the reason that China felt comfortable telling its independent refiners they got sanctioned by Americans not to ignore is because China is calling America's bluff and saying, "Hey, brother, like, are you serious, man? You really don't want us to buy Iranian crude and refine it? I mean, that's gonna shoot oil prices higher, which is not good for you. It's not good for your politics. Gasoline prices will go up, and it's not good for us." And so that's where I think that this might be a little bit of an idiosyncratic issue where China is willing to stand up to the US because, in a way, these sanctions will backfire for America as well. And by the way, that's very similar to the Ukraine war. You know, Russia invades Ukraine, oil prices go up. In part, oil prices go up because of expectation that there will be sanctions against Russia. And then sanctions against Russia are put on paper, and we as analysts read that paper, and what do we find out? We find out the Europeans gave Russians 12 months to comply, or rather, gave 12 months to EU member states to comply with the sanctions. We just said, like, hey, you got to find alternatives to Russian oil. And we all were like, oh, wait a minute, this is not going to take any barrels off the market. Like, obviously, Russia's just going to sell to India and China, whereas EU member states are then going to buy more Saudi. So, like, the world had 12 months to kind of like digest this. And I think that the Chinese are basically telling Americans right now, like, hey, man, like, this is the same thing. Let's not pretend that the world doesn't need, 2 million barrels coming out of Iran every day because, it does.
Well, for me, one of the strange things, not just about Besson's comments, but it's funny. If you read like US press right now, it's all Trump has leverage over China because of the war. If you read Chinese press, like South China Morning Post this morning or any of these others, it's actually Xi Jinping has leverage over Trump as they go into the summit. And this to me is one of those classic media moves lately where they're making a big deal out of a summit and ascribing a bunch of different things to the summit that is not what the summit is actually about. The summit is about what Trump was trying to do in his first term, which was threaten and cajole China into some kind of deal. One of the exceptional things about Donald Trump, I think, is that he does not think of China necessarily as some grandiose geopolitical threat. He looks at China and sees a deal to be made. Now, the way that Donald Trump makes deals, you have that great graphic of the art of the deal and the things that he does there. But that's what he's always wanted to do, and he's been up against the U.S. national security establishment. He's been up against the median voter in the United States, who does not approve of China in general, and he also was up against the pandemic. I think that US China relations might have taken a very different course if the pandemic hadn't happened. Maybe you get
100%.
another Trump administration, maybe you
100%.
get a phase two US China trade deal, everything else. And Trump has been trying to find his way back to where he was at the end of 2019 with the phase one US China trade deal for the last 12 months. And this summit is supposed to be finally the thing that puts him back on that track. And he had to push it back because of the Iran war and everything else. All of which is to say, like, it's not yes, we can talk about the refineries and things like that, but some of the other things that have been happening in the background is that, for instance, just last month, China unveiled a bunch of rules that look to punish foreign firms, especially US firms, that sort of withdraw production from China. If they see that some company is going to try and de-risk itself from China, then the Chinese government wants to create a legal mechanism by which they can go and hurt these countries. You've also seen China creating legal frameworks around many of the critical minerals and commodities that the world needs, your gallium and all these other, minerals that you and I can't pronounce or that you need an advanced graduate degree to pronounce and things like that, because China's who refines them. And I think if we take a step back, one of the interesting ways to think about it, and I'm always thinking about this because I've been on Team Multipolar. I think you were on Team Multipolar before me, but I've been there since 2019 pretty solidly. But the scenario that most that cuts against, I think, multipolarity is something that Trump himself has said in recent months. He said it after the October, truce between the U.S. and China, which is a G2 world, which is the United States and China working together to manage all of these things. And forget about international institutions, forget about the U.S. led international order, blah blah blah. No, like it's the U.S. and China. Everyone else can shut up, and so Trump and Xi Jinping are the adults in the room, and they're going to make a deal. And there is some part of me that thinks that's what Trump thinks he's going to Beijing to do. And it's hard to like really do this. Like it's really stretching the historical analogy. But Nixon went to China to make a deal in 1972, and he went to China to make that deal because he was worried about a multipolar world. He used to talk about it all the time, and he thought that the
That's right.
United States needed partners and allies, and China was one of them if they were going to deal with the Soviets and whoever was coming up. Ironically, he goes to make a deal with China for a multipolar world, not expecting or understanding that the unipolar era was right around the corner. Like the United States was about to win the Cold War and the Soviet Union was about to collapse and China was about to become a factory for all of the goods that the West wanted to consume. And part of me like wants to draw this. Trump is going to Beijing in 2026 trying to build a bipolar one, and I just don't think it's going to work for him. I think he wants to make the deal, and I think all the constraints around him are going to prevent him from making the deal. But it is really interesting to watch him try because I think if he could make a deal, it would net positive probably be better for the world. I don't know. We
Oh,
could
of course
argue
it
that
would be.
point.
No, I know we
Maybe.
can't. Like, of course it will. It would only be bad for like, Bethesda, Maryland. Like it would only be bad for Maryland, Washington D.C. consultants who like sell Cold War. But no, of course it would be good for the world if the two superpowers can manage reality and their rivalry. I think I think this is where it's interesting because you start off with criticism of Scott Bessent for the tweet, for the X, but it is true. Like China can actually, in this particular case, exert massive pressure on Iran, particularly because Iran is not that relevant to China. Many said that China could have put a lot of pressure on Russia as well during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But the truth is that Russia is much more valuable to China as a partner. I don't like using the word ally because Chinese alliance with Russia has not really included military help. Russia, this is American propaganda that China is like supplying Russia with military aid. Um, and I've made this analogy before. Chinese aid to Russia is like the Western democracies' aid to Republicans in Spain. It wasn't very concrete. Whereas, the fascist regimes of Italy and Germany basically like directly got involved in the Spanish Civil War. So Chinese support for Russia has been pretty tepid, but I don't ever see China abandoning Russia. I don't ever see China putting pressure on Russia because it wouldn't make sense for them to do that. They get a lot out of Russia in terms of commodities. Just it's a country that produces more commodities than everybody else in the world. Whereas with Iran, it's like, it's like, 2 million barrels a day, like, that's it. And more so than that, China receives more crude from all the GCC countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE. When you put all of those together, that's why China helped negotiate the detente between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2022. That's why China has tried to present itself to the Arab countries and Iran as a like a neutral party to the Middle Eastern tensions. And I think that that's where I would argue that Scott Bessent tweet like makes objective sense. The one country that really should step up in this case is China. And it's interesting because you're watching China kind of miss an opportunity here, I think. China wants to internationalize renminbi for external use. It wants to make itself look like if not a hegemon, because they're sensitive to that. This is a country with a pretty complicated past relative to Western colonialism. I mean, it was never colonized, but obviously we know the European armies were running through China left, right, and center. I mean, it sees itself more as member of the global South than it does as one of the imperial countries that now has an empire. And so I understand that they don't want to like step up and send an aircraft carrier into Hormuz, but at the same time, if they want to at least illustrate that they are a factor of stability, think about all their trade partners like Brazil. Think about Indonesia. Think about, Sri Lanka. Think about all the African countries that China has invested in terms of infrastructure, building these huge markets. Should China not make an effort to resolve this crisis more forcefully? They've been silent for the most part. They haven't gotten involved other than through allied interlocutors like Pakistan. But the countries that are going to be hurt by this crisis are not going to be the West. It's going to be the poor countries. The West is going to crowd everyone out. People are freaking out about urea. Like, forget it. Like, my bagel is not going to cost that much more. And even if it does, who gives a shit? I live in
It
America.
already costs too much. Have you seen the price of bagels in New York
I
lately?
mean, like,
My
Jesus,
God,
that
man.
is perhaps the most Jewish thing you've ever said in
It's
your
supposed
life.
to be poor Eastern European peasant food. Like, you guys are charging like $10 for a bagel? My God. Like,
Well, that's
chill
because
out.
you go to a fancy place. You can also just go to a. Well, listen, the point is that you and I can afford a $10 bagel. The West is going to be fine. The West is going to elbow out the rest of the world in terms of agricultural output, in terms of energy. It's Chinese economic partners, the global South, that are going to suffer. So why are they not, getting a little bit more involved to pressure Iran? Yes, pressure Iran. Absolutely. They should be pressuring Iran because I would argue that if you stacked up Russia against all of China's global South relationships, fine. Russia may be more important to China than all of Africa and all of Latin America and all of Southeast. Fine. But if you stack up Iran against all of China's relationships, I don't think you can make that case at all. It's not even like there's nothing that Iran has that China needs at all. And whereas all this other stuff that, I mean, their market is Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Those are the markets that China's building. So why are you not stepping up to solve this on behalf of those? And I think that shows a lack of like initiative. Like they're almost like frozen. Like, they're like a basketball player. Like China is that guy on your team who has been hyped. Everybody knows they're the next. They're coming. And then it's the playoffs and you kind of shit the bed. They're like Paulo Banchero or Aman Thompson. China's Aman Thompson. Like all I've been hearing about Aman Thompson for the past like 18 months is how this is the next big hope. Houston Rockets got this guy who's like an athlete and all this. And then like Marcus Smart makes him look incompetent. You know what I mean? Like that's China because this is your opportunity. Show the world that Americans are incompetent. Americans rush into using force without really having a plan. Why isn't China trying to like resolve this issue on behalf of the global South? Because it's the global South that's going to be a problem. You and I are going to like bitch about the price of bagels because that's what we do, but like we're going to still buy it and we're going to be fine.
I wish, first of all, that I could do a Xi Jinping impression and that I could speak in Chinese to you right now, so I could return sir from our last podcast. But I could do neither of those things. I cannot speak Chinese, and it's very actually rare to get like an actual recording of Xi Jinping's voice. I have found, so I don't actually quite know what he sounds like. I also want listeners to know I do not derive any compensation from the Chinese Communist Party. If any Chinese Communist Party listeners would like to start contributing to the Jacob Shapiro Trust Fund, I will take your payment in yuan, whatever you want to do. That's cool with me because I'm about to step in and defend you from cousin Marco here. But thus far, I have not enjoyed any material benefit from taking China's view here. The really simple rejoinder, I think, to what you're saying, Marco, is, oh, okay, you want us to step up? That's great. How much? What are you offering? What do you want to give us so that we will do this? We are not in the business of giving charity to a great power that made a fundamental mistake and violated every single, tenet of international law that it was supposed to be pursuing. You want us to come in and fix it for you? Why should we like, hey, everybody has a price. We're willing to talk to you. Maybe we could talk at the summit about what the price is, but don't go on Fox News and say, hey, China, y'all really need to get in the game. It's your time. We didn't want to play this game in the first place. We were importing really cheap Iranian crude. We were just fine. Y'all upset the apple cart. Like, you're going to have to give us something to make it worth our while. And I would throw out your basketball metaphor and say, it's not about lack of initiative. This is about strategic patience. China's not Paolo Banchero. They're Boris Diaw. They're just sitting outside the 3-point
Oh
line, getting
God.
fat and happy, zinging passes all over the place, directing
What?
traffic. They're like, cool, we're out here. Like, oh, you want us to drive to the hoop? Okay, like open a lane, set me a pick, do something so that I can decide that I want to do something. Otherwise, like I'm going to sit out here and have a baguette and just like throw assists from the 3-point
Listen, nobody likes doughy basketball players more than me. But like, if Xi Jinping and China are Boris Diaw, we gotta like lower Xi Jinping's position on our trade value board. Just for the sake that Boris Diaw probably never
Hey,
made the top.
I'd rather have Boris Diaw than Paolo or who did these other guys that
Oh,
you
that's a
mentioned?
different take for a different time. But listen, here's the reason that I disagree with you. And again, if you and I were pitching our views to Xi Jinping, like I would just tell him, like, yes, America screwed this up. America looks like it kind of walked into a conflict it doesn't know how to resolve. Like I get that. There was this great little like meme that's making the rounds, and it shows like 3 phases of President Trump's plan with the war in Iraq, in Iran. Phase 1 is blockade to Hormuz. Phase 2 is a question mark. Phase 3 is win. So we all get that. The problem is this isn't about America, Jacob. This is about you and your allies in the global south. And it's just I think it is about initiative. It's an opportunity for China to show that it can fix stuff that gets broken. Which is not usually, sorry, that's been the domain of the United States of America since 1945. When things get
Yeah.
broken, like in other words, the Soviet
Yeah.
Union,
When things get broken by the United States, we come in and we break it even more. Like, give me the short list of things we've actually fixed. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, like in the 1950s, 60s, fine. You can say that since the unipolar era, maybe America hasn't fixed a lot, but like it
What
intervened in
else
the
did we fix?
Balkans. Well,
Did we fix Vietnam? Did we fix Congo? Did we fix the Middle East? Did we fix like any of these countries in Latin America?
I think the United States did fix economic coordination, currency coordination. It saved Brazil from a financial crisis. It intervened in the Balkans to prevent what would have been even worse, ethnic cleansing. On occasion, I would argue that the U.S. intervened, and so did Soviet Union, by the way, on behalf of its, on behalf of its vassal states. And my point would just be like, look, there's a huge opportunity here for China to show to the global south, which is Africa, Latin America, Central America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, like, hey, you guys are going to be screwed because of Americans. Americans don't care about you. Urea prices are going up, but Jacob and Marco are going to enjoy their bagels no matter what the cost. They're just going to bitch about the price. But you guys are going to starve to death. So we're going to go in here and actually create a way to negotiate. They haven't done that. They've been kind of quiet. Xi Jinping, I think, said at some point, like, hey, Hormuz should be open. Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
There were a bunch of headlines.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it's not about sending an aircraft carrier. It would be about, hey, let's have the summit in Beijing. Let's do that. And it's interesting to me that China is reticent to do that. Because you know why it's interesting to me? If you're not interested in flagging to the global south that you will fight for their interests when the ugly American stumbles into the China shop and starts breaking stuff, right? Because this is what everybody kind of thinks right now. The ugly American is back. It's Donald Trump breaking shit around the world. Okay, cool, fine. Create that image, promote it. It's not far from the truth, but what are you doing about it? And China's not willing to fix stuff. So if I'm Bangladesh, if I'm Ethiopia, if I'm, Burkina Faso, if I'm Peru, if I'm Paraguay, if I am, Thailand, and I'm thinking about how this crisis affects me. Yes, Americans broke it, but at least Americans are in charge. At least they're doing stuff. The country that I have all this deepening relationship with, China, is not doing anything to open the strait, which matters much more to me than for France or for United States of America or Japan or South Korea, even though they obviously, in Japan and South Korea's case, they import so much LNG, Europe less so, but like they still do, they're going to be fine. They're going to steal my urea. That's what's going to happen. If you're Bangladesh right now and you're importing LNG or urea, you know what's going to happen? The reason Europe is not going to freeze and the reason that South Koreans are going to continue to power their fabs is because they're buy your cargoes. They'll just pay more than you can. No one's going to starve in the first world. Nobody, because we'll just take your urea. Yeah, we'll just we'll pay more for it. And so that's why, like, you don't put yourself in the shoes of the leader of Bangladesh. You're like, hey, China, man, like, what's up? Or like, leader of any country in the world. Like, you should be knocking on China's door and saying, why can't you intervene diplomatically with your ally, Iran? And that's where I think Scott Bessent's tweet I think has weight. Like he's showing to the rest of the world with that X. These guys don't want to play. They have the power to do it. They just don't want to. They kind of don't care about the price of bagel in Peru.
I mean, we already knew this about China. We knew this about China when the pandemic started, when they didn't tell the world what was going on early enough and then hoarded personal protective equipment and all these different things. It wasn't about let's make the world safe. It was about, hey, let's first of all manage the domestic political considerations inside China. And that decision, by the way, is why we never had a chance of containing the pandemic. And then the second order thing was let's make sure that we have PPE. We don't care about the rest of the world. We care about our PPE right now, which, by the way, is a realistic way of thinking about it. China's a big fertilizer um, producer, and it also
Yeah,
exports a lot of fertilizer. They've restricted fertilizer exports
another good
since
example.
April, which is covering what 50 to 75% of their previous volumes. Why? To ensure their own domestic food security and to stabilize prices during their own spring planting season. So it's not
What
about,
about?
hey, global South, the United States is making a big mistake. We're going to show you how good we can be. It's, oh, the United States made a big mistake. We've had bad experience with the peasants starving in the past. We're going to make damn well sure we can feed the peasants. And if we have any leftover, or if we've got some LNG or some cargoes that we can reroute to you, we will. But guys, it's a multipolar world. Like, leave the liberal international order. Why don't you just make sure that you can take care of yourself? And it seems to me that what you're talking about is actually a very Western way of thinking about it. Like, Iran is not a Chinese ally. China has no allies. Its only defense treaty relationship is with North Korea, and I think they regret that one. I think they wish they could get that monkey off of their back so they don't have to deal with they don't have to deal with it anymore. They are not, at least not yet. Like maybe they will become this. But I don't think any thinking person can make an argument that China wants to be an expansionist global hegemon. They are not interested in proving to the rest of the world that they are here to save the day. Now, if you want to build some port infrastructure and you'd like to pay a Chinese construction company to do it, absolutely. They're happy to help you become more self reliant and self sufficient if you want, especially if it is attached with money and things like that. But they have no incentive to go out there and save the global South. They're just giving the United States enough rope to hang itself with. Boris Diaw was maybe the wrong thing. If you want to get a player who's in the pantheon, which lines up with what I'm talking about here, think of Xi Jinping not as Boris Diaw, but as Nikola Jokic.
Mm.
Nobody hurries up Jokic. He's slow. He's plodding. He goes at his own pace. He does it his way. And eventually, he scores. And everybody says, oh, they can't do it. Larry Bird was this way too. He can't jump. He's not athletic. He can't do all the things. And it's just, nobody's going to hurry me up. I'm just going to sit here and very slowly and very methodically do my thing. And you can yell at me and scream at me and tell me that I'm not doing things the right way. And great, I'm going to have the championship at the end of the year. I'm going to be the greatest at the end of the year because I didn't jump at the thing that was right in front of me, which is the problem with US foreign policy well before Trump. Like, this is not a Trump TDS thing. You might remember that I began this segment saying, hey, President Trump, I appreciate what you're doing, man. Like, this is one of those things that I hope that you can figure out because, I mean, I think Cold War 2.0 is actually bad, but some kind of managed G2 relationship between the United States and China, that's probably the best possible scenario for the most number of people in the world for the next 10 to 15 years. Even if that makes my geopolitical projections look stupid, I hope that's the one that emerges. Like, that seems like a good one. I hope he can pull a rabbit out of his hat. But he's not going to do it if Scott Besson is sitting there thinking like, hey guys, like, get in the game. It's time. Like, come on board. Like, it's a fundamentally warped view of how, like, it's as if they're not even on the same planet as China.
I know
So I don't.
you're right. You're right, but they are on planet Earth, and this is the sport we play. So the reason that I don't
It's not
like
the
your
sport they
Jokic,
play though.
I
It's the
know, but
sport
so
we play.
all right. Well, let me get at this a different way. Like the Jokic analogy, right? Why do I think that's a bad analogy? Because most free agents, if they want to go to Denver, and Denver is not exactly like known for attracting free agents in its history. But the reason you would want to go to Denver is because Jokic will find you. He'll boost your stats.
Mhm.
Like that's the thing about Denver Nuggets. Other than Bones Highland, everybody loves playing with Nikola Jokic. And we're like going into pretty like deep stuff here that most people don't care about, which is fine. Like Jokic is a passer. He makes you better. He increases your stats. He will make you more money. I don't
Yeah.
think that China is illustrating that it plays that role. Like, do you want to be on Team China? Well, when there's a global event that occurs that has implications for you, it doesn't seem to me, it doesn't, like, it's not clear to me how China is illustrating that it knows how to pass and boost your stats. That's my point.
Maybe. I mean, there's not a whole lot that China can do in this moment, but if you've been following the Chinese playbook before now, like if you had been playing on China's team, you might actually be better prepared for it. But that's the point. Like China, you're going to get the passes if you're in China's orbit anyway. What China's not going to do is go out of its way to make sure you get a triple double, or go out of its way to
Well,
make
that's what I
sure
mean.
that you get the
Yes.
thing that you need. And by the way, the United States has not been able to do that either, which goes back to why should China do this in the first place? Because if the United States has this blockade, it started this war, the United States is not opening the Strait of Hormuz, so fine, continue to have the Strait of Hormuz closed. And I do think there's a point at which you're right, but again, it cannot be, hey, China, get in the game because you need to do this. It has to be, okay, and for what? What are you going to give us? Are you going to give us some concessions? Do we get to build BYD factories in all of Alabama? Do we like, are you going to withdraw some
Well,
of these
but
stupid tariffs that are starting to,
those are the things in
mess up all of
discussion.
our global supply chains? Like, we're listening.
So a couple of things about that. Couple of things about that. That's the US China deal.
Mhm.
And that's fair. But my point is that this isn't about America. This is about your allies or your purported allies. And let me tell you what America gave the rest of the world. America gave, until President Trump, it gave unfettered access to its markets. Like that was the benefit. That was the carrot of American hegemony. American hegemony was not built on just sticks. There were plenty of sticks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it was magnanimous. There was Machiavellian design. But one of the pillars of American empire was access to its market. China has not really made that available, but it's fine. That's fine. Not every empire is based on that. Like the British Empire was not based on access
Mhm.
to its market. In fact, it did the opposite. It destroyed other countries' industries in many ways, ensuring that its own like survived, particularly with India. But it did supply the rest of the world with capital, and China, I would argue, is kind of similar. It is spreading its technology and capital around the global south, countries that are starved for capital, that are starved for technology. And it's always funny to see the West chastising Angola, chastising Paraguay, chastising Serbia for making deals with China. And it's like, brother, if you want to give me some money to build a bridge, go ahead. China has done that around the world. My point is just that, okay, it seems to me, based on China's behavior over the last 10, 15 years, that they do want to create new markets and new relationships and new alliances. They do want to do that. What's the carrot? Right? America's carrot was that unfettered access to its economy and also defense of some sort of a Western capitalist markets. If you get into trouble, you get an access to the Fed. Maybe Americans bail you out, like in the case of Mexico. But the question right now is, if you're China, are you going to ensure that global South has access to these resources that the West is just going to buy up? And I'm not sure that they've really done anything on that front.
And I'm not sure that they care. Like, they care about the countries that they source things from, and they care about the countries that are important to their supply chains, and maybe they care about the countries that they think are future markets for their goods. They care very much, to go back to your Russia point, they care very much about Central Asia. The inroads they've made into Central Asia over the last couple of years have is one of the many reasons that Russia is in long-term imperial decline, I think. But for the most part, I think they don't want to do those things. It's also happening just sort of without them pushing that hard. You mentioned, I think earlier, about the dollar and the yuan. This is just three headlines from the last week. You've got the former governor of the PBOC saying that a golden window of opportunity for promoting the internationalization of the renminbi is at hand. You've got data showing that China's cross-border interbank payment system saw its biggest single-day transaction value ever, just over the past, what was that, last a couple of weeks ago, and that it's been increasing markedly, strong momentum since March. So daily values of roughly over a trillion yuan. So that's like not quite 200 billion US dollars. That's still a drop in the bucket, but it's rising demand for yuan settlement amid these Middle East tensions. Just this, yesterday, you had China and Indonesia launching a new cross border QR payment system so that users can use domestic mobile apps and scan QR codes and just make retail payments in either country using their own currencies. If you want to go back further, I mean, China and Brazil have been talking about settling trade in yuan AI for over a year. I think I'd have to double check the data on that, but they've been talking about getting rid of the dollar for a while. So I think the deal, sort of with China, is sure, if you are going to interact with us, you get access to all the things that we make. You get access to the yuan if that's what you want. If you want us to come build something, we'll build it for you. What we're not going to do is we're not going to lecture you about what type of government you should have or what the flavor of your regime should be. And also, we're not going to come rescue you. We're not going to come protect you, Mr. Maduro, Mr. Whoever is in charge of Iran. Like, you made your choices. Like, you're going to have to figure that out. Russia, we're not helping with your war in Ukraine. We actually don't super like your war in Ukraine. We'll take your gas. Like, we'll do everything else. But like, we're busy here. We're the Middle Kingdom. Like, we are dealing with things. And if these barbarians want to come and pay tribute, we are happy to accept your tribute. But we're not taking the tribute and shoving it down your throat.
So that's all objectively correct. The history is clear. Your reference to the Middle Kingdom is really what we should land the plane on, and then talk about some of the developments that are happening literally as we're recording this. But I just want to land the plane on this issue. It seems like China really is, like, this is a great litmus test, because this crisis in Hormuz is on a silver platter for China. It's a great opportunity for China to signal to the rest of the world what a benevolent, magnanimous hegemon it is. And it's so easy standing next to Trump America to look, like rational, cool, collected, calm. Hey, let's all just kind of figure this out. And the fact that China's whiffing it suggests that all of those China experts that would like lecture us, Jacob, they will lecture us and tell us China will not play your geopolitical games. China will not play Risk. China doesn't care about, this, that, or the other. And us realists, at least me as a realist, would always say like, no. Don't tell me your fairy tales about medieval China and the Middle Kingdom. This idea that China just believes it's the Middle Kingdom, everybody else is a tribute. You can come and give us your gifts and then we can have some trade, or you don't. We don't care. And what this experience over the last kind of 8 weeks tells me is that maybe those China experts are right. They really, truly don't care. They don't care that people will starve in a country that they are allied with, that they've been like helping, like Pakistan, or Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a great example. China's been really trying to have a great relationship with Sri Lanka. Well, here's an opportunity. If people starve in South Asia, it's going to happen in Sri Lanka due to higher prices of fertilizer, due to lack of LNG and oil. Again, the Europeans are going to be fine. The Japanese are going to be fine. The Americans are going to be fine. It's your allies in the global south that will suffer, and you've done nothing to even try to present an image of trying to assuage the crisis. And it's interesting to me because it proves everyone correct. China just kind of doesn't care, as you say. You're absolutely objectively correct in that. Which is interesting. Interesting.
It goes back to constraints too. China doesn't have a bunch of extra farmland lying around. I mean, if we're going to food as an example, it can't do this. It doesn't. It can. It's very sad that the global South is starving from Beijing's point of view. It would be worse if Chinese people starve. We got to feed the Chinese people first.
No,
then
I agree
we
with
can
that.
talk about, do we want to
But they can do more.
deal with.
I agree with you. But here's what
I don't know if they could do more. Did you they just had they had just had a second Secretary of Agriculture in like the last 2 years get purged. Like there's some bad signals happening when you look a little under.
Yeah. I mean, just from a PR and marketing effort, I think they could do more. Host a summit in China. Offer to do so. I know these are vacuous.
Yeah,
sort of
another summit.
But like, if Iran and US meet in China, if China attempts to be a mediator, or as Scott Besson says, if China diplomatically tells Iran, like, yeah, listen, brother, if you want to have semiconductors in your drones, you're going to have to like work here. Like, that's the point. Because, and this is kind of what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that sometimes you have to discipline your allies, you know, to prove to the vast majority of countries that you have commercial relationships with, including Saudi Arabia and UAE, which are under attack, and from whom you buy more crude than Iran. Like, sometimes you have to discipline countries that you are friendly with. And China's not even willing to do that with Iran. What is it afraid of? Like, what is it afraid of? It would gain so much goodwill in the rest of the world. It wouldn't signal to its allies it's an unreliable ally. It would actually do the exact opposite. It would do exact opposite because, again, I see no evidence that China's been allied with Iran in substantive ways.
Yeah,
And,
I agree with
and that should give them the luxury to pivot. Anyways, it's an interesting question because we've really kind of landed in this conversation on this idea that, like, yeah, the Middle Kingdom runs deep in the psychology and the geopolitical nature of China, because I think they're missing an opportunity here to really showcase their skill set, just like Paolo Banchero and Amen Thompson, who both laid an egg, but hey, they're somehow the future of the league. Anyways,
Well, it also, by the way, it just also goes back to the methodological question that I sort of raised at the beginning of this multipolarity versus bipolarity thing, because I think there are lots of constraints on the US and China divvying up the world. One of them is that China does not want to
yeah,
divvy up the world.
yes,
They're not interested. They want multipolarity. They think multipolarity is good for them, net net. Now, I think you could make an argument that it's not, that there's actually more to gain if you can have some kind of cooperative managed relationship. And if I was Besant and Trump, that's what I would be developing, some kind of conversation where, hey, the problem that U.S. capital really did fix? China.
yeah,
After Nixon went to China, all that money, you're the world's factory, all the power and wealth that you've accumulated, you did that because of the United States. And by the way, it's a symbiotic relationship. The United States, yes, if you're an industrial worker in the heartland, sucks for you. But the United States consumer gets cheap goods and doesn't have to refine a lot of these pollutive things inside their own country. China gets wealth and gets employment and gets all these other things. Like, both sides really enjoyed it. And China, I think, to your point, is making the bet that no, we can live in a multipolar world. We got this. We can make things if we need to. Like, we're going to ignore your sanctions. We're going to start putting these punitive measures on if your US companies are going to disengage. We can do that. Can you, President Trump? Like, to your point, they're calling the bluff. They're saying, fine, leave. See what happens to the CPI with the Iran war energy prices. And if we start cutting off like access to not to the Chinese market, but to Chinese production of inputs and all these other things, just see what happens and see if you can hang with us. But I don't know. Where did you want to take it?
uh, well, I think we need to take it to what's just happened right now, which is that Iran has attacked the UAE. So basically, earlier yesterday, so on Sunday, President Trump declared Operation Freedom, I think it was, which,
Of course it did.
yeah,
How is that different than every day? Every day has been Operation Freedom since President Trump was elected. Don't you feel more free? Don't you love that smell of freedom in the morning?
you're goddamn right I do. Uh, so, yeah, President Trump announced Operation Freedom, which was like, uh, I mean, if you actually read the specifics, it's like, hey, insurance companies, shipping companies, and crude producers, let's all try harder to get through the Strait of Hormuz. But we're not actually going to escort any vessels. And then this morning, early morning, Iran's IRGC claimed it struck a U.S. frigate with missiles, while the U.S. military, CENTCOM, the Central Command, claimed that the two U.S. flagged vessels safely transited the waterway. So each side rejected the other's account. There was a cargo vessel near Dubai reported it had a fire in its engine room, according to the UK's maritime trade operation. And then the UAE's defense ministry just now said it downed 3 missiles fired from Iran. Fourth one crashed into the sea. But there was also a attack on UAE's petroleum facility, oil facility in Fujairah, which is important. That was hit with a drone, according to UAE. but Fujairah petroleum site is interesting because, of course, that is where that's the terminus of the pipeline that bypasses Strait of Hormuz. So effectively, to break it down for those of you listening, on Sunday, President Trump says, we've got a plan to get vessels out of Strait of Hormuz. He claimed it was a humanitarian mission because the sailors were starving. They were waiting to exit the Strait of Hormuz. They need to get out, go home. And then Iran basically woke up on Monday and said, oh, that's what you think is going on.
Well,
And
what
so,
does this
yeah,
tell us, cousin?
what does it tell us? I mean, it tells us that Iran is very sensitive to any attempt by the US to force open the Strait of Hormuz, obviously, naturally. Um, it also tells us that they're illustrating their displeasure in limited way. I mean, of course, it's what is this, May 4th, 9 a.m.
May
West
4th?
Coast
Yeah.
time, noon East Coast time. So this is an attack that's ongoing. There doesn't seem to have there hasn't been an attack against Saudi Arabia. There hasn't been an attack against anyone else. But of course, it's a developing situation. But if it were to end right now with 4 ballistic missiles and some drones, it's kind of like an amuse-bouche at a restaurant. This is like Iran is just saying like, hey, don't try to get the ships through. We're serious about the blockade, just like you are. The only way to resolve the blockade is through diplomatic means. We still have the capability to hit energy facilities around the Gulf region. And so, but it's a limited break in the ceasefire. It could have been a much more. I mean, they could have sent a swarm of 100 drones. They didn't. But they did target specifically UAE's critical energy infrastructure. So I think that, yeah, I mean, it's a sign that Iran is basically telling the US the only way out of this is negotiations.
I mean, the ceasefire is interesting because it's been a real ceasefire. I mean, the fact that Iran is breaking it for this reason is a pretty disturbing indicator because it gets us back onto that escalatory cycle. No, I mean, yeah, we're recording here Monday, May 4th. I'm going to tell Smoo to get this out immediately, but maybe we are going to get way more drones, or maybe it's just a tap on the wrist. I don't know, but I mean, I think the lesson is that this war is far from over. Markets have been, I think, celebrating the end of this and even trying to get to some kind of new normal and things like that. Um, by the way, I just opened up my I just opened up X to double check one of these things about the UAE thing, and the first post, cousin, is a tweet from the White House. The quote of the tweet is, "In a galaxy that demands strength, America stands ready. This is the way. May the fourth be with you." It is President Trump dressed up as the Mandalorian with the little baby Yoda in his sack while he's holding an American flag. That's an official tweet from the White House. So everything's going to be fine. Everything is
Everything,
fine.
yeah,
Like
I'm
like the
totally fine.
Mandalorian is on it. Like everything is going to be good. Um, God, I have now. I'm just like now staring at Trump the Mandalorian in all his glory. I mean, where do we go from there? Everything's fine. You can see that I've just had an aneurysm basically.
Well, I mean, everything is not fine. And in particular, I mean, the market reaction is so far muted. But again, it's very, very, very early. I mean, this is like noon on May 4th, Monday. Uh, Iran just did this. Obviously, it could be an all night kind of a thing, where 12 hours from now, the war is back on and the US is targeting Iran. Or it could be that this is, as I said, it's not even an appetizer. It's just an amuse-bouche by Iran to try to just to illustrate that they are serious about the blockade. You want the blockade to open. Don't try to open it yourself. You need to talk to us. That's what Iran may be doing with this. So yeah, I mean, I think the issue here is it goes back to our podcast with Rory Johnson, the energy expert. If you guys missed it, go back to that. I think the title of the podcast is The Supply Hole.
Yep.
The Supply Hole a couple of podcasts ago. And basically, we're doing this podcast with Rory Johnson, who's been doing nothing on X but like warning everyone the world is going to end. And the surprising take was like, he was like, oh, well, but there was an oversupply. And so inventories globally are full of oil, not just the strategic reserves, but also private inventories. And so his conclusion, and I know both you and I kind of jumped on this when he said it. He was saying like, well, yeah, I think in May oil prices will be like 120, June 130, and we're both like, whoa, 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 time out. When do we get to 200, Rory? When does the world resort to canisters and cannibalism? And he was like, August, September, which is a lot later than any one of us thought. We all thought early May, the world ends. So when the war starts at the end of February, February 28th, right? That's when the war started, or was it March 28th? Everything kind of blends. What?
February, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So when the war started in February, we all kind of said, okay, look, we got 2 months and then it's game over. You got
Yep.
March and April, and then it's game over. And it's not game over. There's actually a lot more oil than people thought. And who cares about fertilizer? Because poor people are not going to be able to buy nice,
Yeah,
bagels with
because
salmon.
nobody cares about the global south, including the United States.
Nobody. So it's all good. We've all realized, like, it's going to be fine. And I think that both you and I, when we kind of like sniffed that view that Rory had, our immediate take was, well, then the war can go, or like at least the ambiguity, at least the closure can go on longer.
That was the take, but it also is one of the reasons I'm so confused about the market, because the market is going from strength to strength, even with all this uncertainty and even with all this volatility. And I mean, I don't know if you look at, and it's not just the US market, like Korea, Taiwan, like markets that should be overexposed to what's happening are just doing just fine. I don't know if you saw that Bloomberg chart that was making the rounds of in 1973 when you had the the Yom Kippur War, that it basically took somewhere between 6 and 9 months for markets to actually understand the implications of the oil embargo. Like, it was only after the embargo was lifted that you saw a big climb down in equity prices in the S&P 500. Of course, like, historical analogies are really rough. So like mid 1970s, very different to what's happening in the world right now. But I think the lesson from that chart is that, okay, like maybe there is a lagging indicator on the crisis, because I mean you've gotten shade in the past because you're the grand maestro fader of geopolitical risk. If you'd faded this shit when the war started, like, you'd be pretty good right now. Like, the risk isn't looking that bad. If anything, you just throw on some oil longs and you're good. But the market is just like, okay, cool. Like, what's the next crazy thing that the world is going to throw at
Yeah,
us in the Strait of Hormuz? We're fine.
the S&P is up 10% in a month, which is insane. Obviously, it actually had a pretty shitty performance from October. So let's just be very clear. I mean, it was flat for, pretty much like all of last 3 months of last year, and then all the way until it bottomed on 30th of March. So from October to March 30th, you lost money in the S&P 500, just to be clear. So when I say it's up 10%, it's because, well, that's literally last 30 days, it showed some signs of life. Look, there are other things going on planet Earth, and the market has to account for all of them. AI Capex is going through the roof, and AI adoption, which I've been bearish on, and I'm changing my view completely on that. AI adoption is going through the roof to the point where, like, you know, I'm getting emails from my IT department about like, hey, like they're like 6 months ago, there was an email from management like, if you don't use AI, you'll be reprimanded. Pretty much. Yeah, straight up. And there was just 2 weeks ago, I got an email from somebody in the firm saying like, oh, I noticed you haven't been using your OpenAI corporate license. To which I replied, I use Anthropic, brother. Give me a break. But then, like literally 2 weeks later, the email comes from another part of the company, like, "Hey, so like, love the enthusiasm, but can you like not use the most advanced features because like it costs money, you know?" And so like, so my point is, just in like a couple of weeks, we went from like, "Hey, get with the program, get with the revolution, or we will accuse you of being part of the bourgeoisie." Like there was that. And then it's like, but maybe don't be all in on AI just now because, like, hey, it costs money. So, what that tells you is there's still scarcity when it comes to this issue. There's like a lot of more building to come. There's a lot more data centers to come. And listen, it's all going to end in tears eventually. The problem is that it could end in tears 5 years from now, 3 years from now, a year from now. And if it's
Mm.
the latter two or the former two, like you definitely want to still stay invested in the market. So I think that it's very difficult for the markets to decide what matters more, especially given Rory Johnson's performance on our podcast, where he's saying, like, look, we're kind of good. The world's not going to end because oil price hits 120 or 130. Like, that's just not going to happen. We need 150 to 200 for people to start selling, because who cares about AI at that point? But like at 120, 130, the world's going to be okay. And that's why I think the stock market is kind of playing a game of chicken with President Trump. Game of chicken is, two guys in a car driving at one another. Whoever swerves first loses. Whoever continues to drive straight gets the girl. And the stock market is telling to President Trump, we've swerved before, but this time we think you're going to swerve. So we're just going to focus on what's a long-term story, which is adoption of AI by corporates around the world, the Capex story there, the needs. And we're not going to be distracted by this near-term thing, which we believe you're going to have to resolve because you lost the war and you're going to have to open Hormuz Strait one way or another.
Well, which is a nice way of putting a bow on the entire episode, because I want to modify something you said just very slightly, which is the world will be okay. No, the world's not going to be okay, but countries that have cheap energy and that are doing this build out are going to be great. And so that inequality between the global south and between those developed nations is probably going to increase. So if you're the United States, you've got the shale revolution, you've got energy security. Okay, like you have a chance of being okay. If you're China and you're rolling out renewables and nuclear and you've got Russia as your, backyard gas station, good, you have a chance to kind of do things. If you're one of these countries that is importing lots of energy or importing lots of food, you're kind of screwed. But then it also goes to the US China talks, because if the US and China cannot get on the same page when it comes to trade, I know some listeners have pushed back against this, and I'm still in the process of doing my research about this. But it goes back to what I was saying before. The US and China are the biggest winners of globalization. That was a symbiotic relationship that the US and China entered in together. And if the United States and China decide to decouple that relationship or can't agree on moving that relationship forward, then the supply chains that allow for all the inputs in the data centers, doesn't matter if you have the cheap energy, you're not going to have the things that you need in order to create the data centers that everyone says are going to power these things that are with AI. And then you've got projections about AI versus supply chain concentration and volatility that is preventing those things from coming. And then the market really does have to come to Jesus, because then it's okay, we've got $140 barrel and the US and China are at each other's throats about trade, and we can't even build the data centers even if we want to. Where's the productivity gains coming from artificial intelligence? You and I, to your point, we can go on Anthropic or Claude or ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever you're using. We haven't been like, okay, I pay a little more fee, I get a little more tokens, like everything's good. Like, what happens when you're trying to do something with my AI assistant is named Sally? What happens when I'm engaging with Sally and Sally says, "Oh, you've reached your quota for the day. Sorry, there's not enough power, not enough data centers in the United States for me to
Well, that's,
continue working with
by the
you."
way, Jacob, that's going to happen no matter what.
I know, but is it going to happen tomorrow? Like, I
No, I
hope not,
mean,
because I'm really enjoying Sally. She's really helping me. Shout out to Sally.
I still don't. I still think you should talk to your wife about this, but we're going to leave that aside. We're
It's
just gonna,
fine.
we're just gonna
She
leave it.
she never makes it to the end of our podcast anyway. But like, if she
Yeah, this
does,
is
don't.
like,
Megan knows she has nothing to worry about
we'll
from Sally.
just, yeah,
All
it's
good.
it's okay, it's okay. Uh, look, I think obviously, if the war continues past Rory's point, the market just doesn't believe it will. And this is what, and this is why what I'm nervous about is that I'm in a violent agreement with the market.
Mm.
And so obviously there is some probability, which is not 0 or 10%, it's much higher, that, the situation becomes an impasse and the President Trump just says, you know what, screw the midterms, screw everything. I really want to resolve this Iran issue once and for all. And then, yeah, we go into a recession, global recession, and then everything breaks. And I think that probability is, out there. It's not 0. I just don't think it's the baseline case. It would be highly unusual for him to care about anything, quite frankly, with that level of. And you know how I'm right about this, by the way?
Mm.
I got these people telling me how Trump really cares about this issue. People who have worked for him or who have occasionally been within a 100-meter radius of him, so they pretend they know what he thinks. Uh, if he cares so much about this nuclear issue, then why didn't he just bomb Iran in the first term? He had 4 years to do it. He didn't like the Obama deal, the JCPOA. Hey, don't tell me, well, Marco, there were legal structures in how you abandoned a treaty and withdraw from it, so it takes some time. It's like, no. No, Trump would have just been like, look, fuck this deal that Obama made. Everything Obama touched is crap, obviously, right? So I'm going to redo everything. Let me deal with them once and for all. And he didn't do that. So, no, I don't think that this rises to the top 10 list of things that Trump cares about. And so I do think that he understands math enough, or he has people on the staff who understand math to basically illustrate, like, look, we do have a window. All the people counting barrels were wrong. There is actually a huge oversupply. It will get to the market. The world will not end in May or June. But like we probably should land the plane in July or August. So like the timeline kind of like, and that gives everyone more flexibility to kind of engage in a peeing competition. So Iran and US have more room to do that. Unfortunately, to the detriment of global South and poor countries, but such is life. And certainly Tehran and Washington, D.C. are not going to care about the global South.
Well, and the thing is, he might actually be right, but he's right only if he goes and makes his deal with Xi Jinping. Because if he walks out of Beijing with nothing, I think it fundamentally changes like some of those things that we're talking about. Because then we're not just talking about energy. I think we're talking about renewed tariffs and supply chain concentration and all of these different inputs that are coming from China versus how
Mhm.
fast can the United States spin up capacity for those inputs. Like, I think when you're thinking about how Trump is looking at the board, I think he cares much, much more about making the deal with China than anything else that's happening. And to a certain extent, like the oil problem can be solved. The China problem cannot be solved unless you are able to work with Xi
So,
Jinping.
so that's a
So,
great point, Jacob. Great point, and you've landed on a conclusion. Unfortunately, I was in as one of these like eyes wide shut events. I mean, just like in terms of exclusivity, not in terms of activities. Um,
mm,
but it was Chatham House. I'm sure this gentleman would be more than happy if I shared his name, but I just don't know if I can. Very, very great analyst, member of the sell side tribe, as you and I are as well. An independent researcher with a deep knowledge of China. And we're on stage together, and we agree on like 90% of the things. And I'm trying to explain the world we're living in. And the world I think we live in is a very much a world where everything needs to be rebuilt. Not
mm.
necessarily because it should be rebuilt, but we've just decided that it needs to be rebuilt. So the whole world is really wired for American empire. Like, why doesn't Germany have a defense? Um, why doesn't Germany have the military capable of fighting Russia? Why does Australia get its kerosene imported from South Korea? Why does Saudi Arabia pay Ronaldo and a bunch of golfers instead of building more infrastructure? Why does UAE and Kuwait and Bahrain float all their stuff down the Hormuz Strait when they could have built pipelines in conjunction with Saudi Arabia?
Mhm.
Why? The answer to each one of these answers is because America. That's it. Because America got your back. Why do Canadian pipelines go south? Where else are they going to go? Germany, why would we spend on military? America's got our back. Saudi Arabia is like, yeah, Ronaldo deserves $1 billion, but shouldn't you build another pipeline? Nah, the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain's got our back. Australia is like, what's wrong with importing kerosene from half the world away so we can fly off our island? What's wrong with that? America's got our back. And so when America suddenly doesn't have your back, all of these things have to be fixed by every country on the planet. And that inherently is very inflationary. You suddenly have to fix all of these issues. And so I'm going through this thesis, like in explaining why this is creating this enormous capex burden. And the gentleman on stage goes like, yeah, and that's why you have to give up something. You have to give up one of your north stars, one of your normative moral goals. And in the case of America, it's going to have to make a deal with China. Because you cannot also, on top of everything you just said, also have a trade war with China. And China actually has considerable excess supply of everything.
Mhm.
It has disinflation inside its own economy because it's producing too much. And so, in order to accommodate the next 5, maybe 10, but probably 5 years of this global restructuring, China and America kind of have to have a truce. That's kind of the idea, right? And that's what you're saying.
It is. And to end it here, because I know you gotta go catch a plane. I mean, why should China go give things to the global South if you know that the global number one's about to come to you and ask for a deal? Well, you gotta save those goodies for somebody who's gonna pay more for it than the global South. Just saying.
No, I agree with that, but at least, you know, I do think they could offer some at least diplomatic clout, and they're just missing in action. By the way, one of the things you said early on is how the pandemic was so important. You
Mm.
know, I just want to double click on that before we leave.
Yep.
There's this great Pew Research poll that updates, I think, yearly, and it says opinion poll view of China favorable, unfavorable. Unfavorable started rising in 2012, and it was about 50 to 60% unfavorable, 40 to 50% favorable. So throughout the Obama years, the pivot to Asia, the South China Sea, the red line, all this stuff, the 9 dash line, the tensions between China, Japan, China, Taiwan, American public started getting a little bit cranky about China.
Yeah, although just to add one little nuance to what you're talking about, young people in the United States and also young people in China were much more positive
Yes.
towards China. It was
Yes.
older people who remembered the Cold War. It was like, "Ooh, China's coming back." Whereas young people, fairly late into this, like young people didn't really flip until much later in the data. It was older people were starting to turn, and then young people turned. But go ahead.
And what we're talking about here is just favorable or unfavorable, not is China an enemy.
Mhm.
Anyways, the pandemic really toggled this, and we went from basically 55-45 in favor of unfavorable to 80-20. That's where we found ourselves in 2023. Now, the gap's been closing a little bit. And so now the favorable view of China has gone from 15 to 30% in just 2 years.
Mhm.
And I think that Trump is riding that wave. And I think he's accommodating that wave, saving TikTok's presence in the US as an example, campaigning on bringing BYD factories to the Midwest. The other thing I would say is that there's another poll where that asks respondents, is China an enemy of the US? Also, Pew Research. It peaked in 2024 at about 42% of Americans saying, yes, China's an enemy. It's now down to under 30%. It still means that a third of Americans believe that they don't have just an unfavorable view, like, oh, China's like not fair on trade. There's about a third of Americans who still do believe China's an enemy, but it did come down from 40 since 2024. And this data is from January 26. So just a little bit of a point. I do think the pandemic was hugely important. And I think this is something that's very also important. Like oftentimes, us geopolitical analysts, we think about geography, we think about power, we think about structure. And I know you have always been much more open to, like, hey, man, like the life just happens. And in this particular case, yeah, I think the pandemic definitely soured the relationship. I'm not necessarily sure that would have happened anyways. Because one of the things I always tell my clients, but also just regular people, like if we were casting a Hollywood superhero movie, we would have fired China as the villain because he just didn't carry the role. He just
Mhm.
doesn't really do a good enough of a job. Like Soviet Union was such better villain than China. We would have gone to China and say, hey, listen, like love the crossover appeal between sitcoms, Netflix, and movies, but I think we're gonna go with someone else, like we're gonna see if like Soviet Union wants to come out of retirement because like you just haven't really shown us that you want to be the villain.
Well, I mean, we had to fire them as the villain because Hollywood figured out that they couldn't resell movies or get people to watch the movies if they made China the villain, which is why Top Gun Maverick, I believe I had that on our
Yeah.
geopolitical movie list, is such a great movie. There's a reason that China is not the villain. It should be the villain, but they wanted to make sure they could sell those movies in China. There's a region that originally Maverick, I believe, had a Taiwan patch in the first one, no Taiwan patch in the second one. Like, they're not messing around with that. So China didn't want to be the villain in the first place. I also just want to say, I wrote a long essay about the data that you're talking about, and I think you're absolutely right that the pandemic was an inflection point. But it also, I think, speaks to the power of propaganda and of
Mhm.
top-down views. I think most Americans think of themselves as very individually minded, and they're not. They're a mob and they're a herd. It's one of the reasons I express such disdain for them all the time on the podcast, because the numbers really, like, you're right, the
Right.
pandemic was a huge jump, but the numbers start moving in 2015 and 2016 when Trump is railing about China on the campaign trail and the trade war and the post-2008 experience. Like, that's when you start seeing real movement. And the fact that it's been coming back a little bit over the last 12 to 18 months is because your top-down leader has changed his tune. He wants the investment you're talking about. He's trying to rehabilitate the image a little bit. And that's not, your median voter, oh, doing the research and figuring it out. No, I'm doing all these other things. It's just you're imbibing the sense of
The vibe.
insecurity that is around you.
The
You're
vibe.
imbibing the vibe, and you're thinking it's because you're a rugged individualist American who lifted yourself up by your bootstraps. No, it's not. It's because it's in the ether, and like, you decided China was bad, and now the leader is trying to say China's good, and he's fighting the national security establishment about China being good. And now you're seeing like the numbers go in a different
Well,
direction. So I think you're right that China can move the needle a little bit there, but I think it really does speak to how top down leadership positions, when they talk about other countries or other people or other races or political like issues, it moves the needle meaningfully. We are not nearly as independent minded as we think. Like, the vibes are real and we listen to our leaders even when we hate them. Like, even when we think they are terrible. Like, 70, I think the disapproval rating on China right now in the United States is 77%. It wasn't that before, and that's all because Donald Trump started saying nasty things about China well before the pandemic. So I would just throw that in.
Antonio Gramsci introduces the concept of cultural hegemony, not to bring it back to Marxism, but I mean that's exactly what you're saying. It's how and the reason I want to introduce Gramsci here to just illustrate your brilliant point is that this isn't about Trump. I mean, Joe Biden could have tried to fight against this rising tide of anti-China sentiment. He surfed it like
He doubled down.
enthusiastic. He tripled
I think
down
Tr
on it.
I think Trump eventually wants a deal. I think Biden was just, "Yeah,
Yes.
let's do
No,
it, swamp. Let's triple down."
I think Trump from 2016 intended to land the plane.
Mhm.
Obviously,
Yeah.
that's why the phase one deal is called phase one. Duh. And then the pandemic happens. It becomes convenient, obviously, to blame China at the time because you're about to lose the election, right? So you want to make sure that it's the Wuhan flu. Although, like objectively speaking, does seem like he probably did leak out of a lab, but the issue is that Trump doubles down on it because he's like, "Oh my God, I'm going to lose the election because there's this pandemic." And then Joe Biden comes in and he triples and quadruples down on it because the Democrats, of course, always have this albatross around their neck that they're doves. It's very difficult for them to land the plane on any conflict, any war.
Yeah.
And so
And
now
and
we're
especially on China. Like, that goes back to FDR taking the wrong side on China. That, like, it's one of the reasons the Dems led the charge into Vietnam. It's like, it really is an albatross.
But I think this is a brilliant point, and it's a great point for everyone listening to this to understand because we're here to fight Gramsci's cultural hegemony, okay?
Mm.
Like, we're here to tell you when something is propaganda. I mean, that's why geopolitical cousins exists, because for all those rugged individuals who think they know what they're talking about, like you have to work so fucking hard to not fall into these memes, these narratives that are really controlled, not through some conspiracy theory. It's controlled through basically almost like the way that crickets all synchronize their cricketing
Mhm.
or the locusts do the same. Like that's how we in society adopt these narratives. I've had clients who for the past 5 years basically adopted the US line on China. And at the first hint that Trump is negotiating a deal, And after a 40% increase in Chinese stocks in 2025, they're all like, "What? China's awesome! Like, have you seen? Have you seen what they're doing?" Like, yeah, exactly. And I think that that's why we do this podcast. Just not necessarily because we're the cure, but at least we can like bring up this to our listeners and say, "Hey, you're living in a world where propaganda is pervasive. You may think that you're thinking for yourself, but it's so difficult to do that."
It is. It is.
I mean, just like it's so difficult to become self aware of the reality that Oklahoma City Thunder are the favorites to win the NBA Finals purely because the refs have decided that if you're under 6'7", you can wantonly foul anyone taller than you.
I think the Spurs are coming, man. I mean, those big women in San Antonio, they're going to be rejoicing here soon. I think they're going to be sending those Oklahoma City Thunder to Galveston, that dirty ass water.
I would love to see that, my friend, but like I think the Gramscian hegemony has just gotten a hold of us, and I think that the Thunder will cease to be a favorite not when they get injured or they meet their match. It will be when this like propaganda qualitative decision that the NBA has made that the Thunder players play great defense. Once that like tips over into like no, or maybe they're just fouling nonstop. That's what we need. We need an attitude shift. But I don't think we're there yet, judging from I don't know, maybe I don't know. We'll see. I mean, you know, Wemby is the rising star. I think the NBA will have many reasons to make sure that the Thunder can't butcher him. But like last year in the playoffs, like Jokic was being assaulted by Caruso, and everyone was like apparently fine. Oh, no, come on, he's so cute. He's bald. Look at him. He looks like your accountant, like your CPA, and he's
I mean,
out there
we need to
fouling
spend a
Jokic.
whole episode on Wemby because he's obviously proof that the aliens are here. So I want to know what other extraterrestrial technologies are about to enter the system because you can't argue any. Like, let's stop talking about UFOs. Like, there it lies. Like, there's the UFO right there. Don't tell me that that's normal.
Well, and on that little anti OKC note, I think we can
Let's wrap it. Let's get you to the airplane.